Hi, I'm Mark from DoTank, and I would like you and I to go on a little journey to explore and understand what we mean by business design thinking. And I don't mean what we as DoTank mean, what the market is starting to make sense of in terms of all of these evolving methodologies coercing into one or two different disciplines. I see this as an actual discipline. We call ourselves business designers for a good reason. So what we're going to talk through is, what do we mean by business design thinking, and what is it that it starts to demystify? Whether you're in the innovation space or not, there's lots of buzzwords out there. Lean startup, business model innovation, sprinting techniques. There is tons and tons of really good books, some really amazing academic learning opportunities for all of us, whether you're just a curious learner or you're already in that space. But then sense making it into the things that we need to use practically to either get projects done, to shift businesses, to form teams, whatever the actual problem to solve is or the challenge. And this, for us, is the evolving methodology that we've started to align on over the last 5 or 6 years in our space. And we call it business design thinking. So when we get asked the question about what do you guys do, well, my head wanders towards, the problems we solve, the customers that we work with. The other question in there is, well, how do you do it? Well, this answers part of the how, the underlying discipline in methodology. And we would break it up into 4 parts. So you will have heard undoubtedly the term design thinking. I believe myth tells us that this was coined by IDEO, and maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, it doesn't really matter. It's a fairly well-known term, and it's around understanding human-centered design, thinking about our customers first, thinking about the emotional journey that they go on, understanding their problems to solve, the jobs that they need to do, and the opportunities that we can perhaps create for them. Everything centered around the experience of that person, that persona, that collective of individuals, that organization, that entity, country, whatever it may be. Groups and groups of people that we can design things for. Design thinking and all the principles around design thinking, that is centered on that part. So that's one part of 4. That design thinking is not business design thinking. Absolutely not in our opinion. The second part is visual thinking. So yes, if you look at some design thinking methodologies and books, most of them will have an ode towards visual thinking, but it's not centered on the power of visual thinking and the ability to tap into this visual processor that we all have. And that tends to come through into how we visually display things, whether we use visual tools, visual artifacts, the way that we communicate. Our eyes and our brains are incredibly powerful in terms of aligning and decision making and understanding complex things. And what we're calling out here in business design thinking is we want to play towards this very underutilized superpower that every single human being has. It's not something that we're taught at school. It's actually something that we forget from school, because at school, most of us would have doodled and drawn, and because we didn't know how to write and we couldn't spell back then. Some of us still can't, myself included. So we've got design thinking about the human-centered design. Who are we designing something for? Not what we can ram down this person's throat. The power of visual thinking, the processing of all of these complex things around us and using that as a superpower to accelerate the thing that we're trying to achieve. Then we bring in rigor. So business rigor in the form of business model innovation. So this tends to sound a bit scary. Listen to the squeaky pen. It sounds scary, it sounds big, it sounds strategic, it sounds bulky. But again, we can start to break that down into simple ways to understand parts of a business or an opportunity or a venture to innovate from. Do we want to innovate around customer relationships? Do we want to innovate around key partnerships in a business model? Now, for those of you that recognise that I'm making reference here to a visual tool that's centred on customers, which is called the business model canvas. You'll see that in the tools page. So business model innovation is more the techniques around being rigorous and not just focused on innovating new products and services, because that's only one part of the business model. So how do we innovate through different parts of the business itself? And then in doing so, we become far more rigorous in our thinking. So this brings in real rigor, but it also allows us to stretch our mind into a different space and a different plane when it comes to innovation techniques. Very powerful. So that's business model innovations. We've got the human, the people, the customers. We've got this visual processing power that helps us to just understand things better, faster, quicker. We've got business rigor through business model innovation techniques. Then we have the good old fashioned, because again, it's not new, pace, sprinting techniques, whatever we call it in terms of the methodologies, lean startup. You look at the Google Ventures book on the 5-day sprint. There's lots of these things out there that force us into iterative techniques, really focused on the end in mind, whether it's short, small, fast steps to get to something, more high impact, but you might have to wander and duck and dive to get there rather than, the big 3-year plan. And there's a lot of techniques in there which are very, very powerful. So when we look at the combination of these things and we think, okay, we have to be human-centered, that's called design thinking. We absolutely want to employ the use of visual thinking, and mainly, if I'm being very honest, mainly through the variety of visual tools that we use to hold the complex conversations that this unearths, whether you're into strategy design, value proposition, culture change. We've got about 30 or 40 different visual tools that help the complexity of those conversations, and that's where this really, really kicks in. Beyond this stuff, which is useful as well, we've got business model innovation that gives us the rigor, and we've got the pace that really helps us get shit done. Let's cut to the chase. We want fast-paced, high-impact stuff. The world is changing faster and faster around us, and we need to keep up. So if you're a part of an innovation team, or a new venture, or a startup, or a business that thinks it needs to reinvent itself, we're already potentially in this mindset of being 10 years behind the competition. We've got to inject pace, but we can't just throw money at it and expect things to get done really, really fast. We have to take this holistic view as to, right, what is it we're trying to redesign? Who are we designing for? How do we employ some really cool, fast-paced techniques that really dive into complexity and be rigorous? And how do we get it done at pace? That, in a nutshell, is what we call business design thinking. And if you want to dig in and really see how it works in practice, we're going to wander through each of these individually. So I'll talk a little bit more about the methodologies themselves, design thinking, visual thinking, business model innovation, pace. But I think the real value is, right, okay, that sounds great, Mark. I get it. I've heard about these things. This is nothing new. I've read all the books. I've looked at business model generation. I've done the 5-day sprint through Google Ventures. I've read all of Dave Gray's stuff on game storming, and I've got all these different visual tools. Tick, tick, tick. I get it. But how do we use it? Where's the practical application of this? So the second part of what we'll go through on this is, well, where do we make it real? So what are the problems that this helps to solve? What are some of the opportunities that we can create with this way of thinking and way of working? That's what we'll wander through.